Hey guys, so I wanted to, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I'm going to go through teachings of the Toltec Survivor, and I've made notes as I'm reading it to share with you Koyote's own words on the assemblage point. This has been a point of fascination for a lot of people for a long time. My initial introduction to the idea of the assemblage point was through the works of Carlos Castaneda. I didn't learn anything about the assemblage point from Castaneda other than scary death things. You know, like it's the whole, it's the whole stalking warrior, spiritual warrior mentality that sometimes I, as just like a very flexible, free spirit kind of person, like I don't really get it as much. Like, but I think that as somebody who's like, yeah, I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll just start talking about myself. But but anyway, my initial conception of it was not really shaped that much by that. Later, I started finding works online which are much more in the modern energy healing vein, like cosmic healing, quantum healing, Reiki, all of this stuff, and actually making people who work with the aura and know how to bring in, color therapists, color healers will actually change your frequency. I don't want to say like vibration, but I guess it's all the same thing, whatever. To change the color of your aura so that you're more positively vibing towards a gold or something like that, which is alchemy. It's just everybody has a different way of doing it. And they would talk about the assemblage point as being mostly right here, and this is in almost like a medical qigong therapeutic kind of sense. Like they've mapped everything out very well, and they know that there's this sort of filament, and it's usually right here in the center of the chest, and they manipulate that and work with it. Or it might just be another end to it, because in the Castaneda teachings, and also Coyote mentions this, and I'll get to that as well, that the assemblage point is like back in the back of you and to the left, somewhere out here. And the Castaneda stuff says all these things about like death. Death is stalking you at every moment, and it's like right behind you, and I sort of have it linked up in my head with the assemblage point that if something gets off, you could essentially sever your entire connection to this reality. That will make more sense as I read the stuff from Coyote's book. Let me just emphasize again that this book is gold. If you haven't read it, read it, get it. It's not that expensive on Amazon. If you have Kindle, you can get it for extremely cheap. Yeah. So there's no reason not to read it. It is a conglomeration of actual things that Coyote said in the course of this workshop that he held several years ago, and they have since taken it and refined it to make it a little more standalone book. There are still some things editorially that I wouldn't that I don't care for too much, but that's just me being a grammar Nazi and that kind of thing, format Nazi. Like the paragraphs aren't like indented, and it's like a stylistic thing. That's the only thing that really bothers me about it. But otherwise, it's very conversational. But beyond that, it stands on its own just fine. Like a stew. Yeah. Thick stew. Dinty more. Anyway, so I'm going to go and talk about what Coyote says about the assemblage point and see if I can put it together for you guys what this thing really means. I have been working with it in the more modern sense of there's like a filament sort of in front of the heart chakra that you can work with and tweak around, and the conception of it is as this circle, and wherever your assemblage point is like twacked out of place, because obviously it's supposed to be central so that everything's symmetrical and you've got that energy flow and your world is groovy. And if it gets out of place, this is how we end up being paranoid about different things and our reactions, and we see everything as a fight or flight, or if it's down here, then we can get like real depressed and we get stuck in this reality where everything's just a bummer and we're Eeyore. To me, this is, I mean, this is obviously, as I said, the more modern conception of what the assemblage point means to energy healers. I don't think that they're necessarily not the same thing. It's just that, you know, the fact that the position of this lens is a totally different thing somewhat bothers me, you know, so I'm trying to figure out exactly how. It can also be that this is the new energetic paradigm, the new paradigm of, you know, symmetrical ascension and balance. And so we've been stuck in this tonal, it's called the tonal reality, and that's basically like Maya, the illusion of everything or whatever. We'll get more into that. And it's like stuck here, and that's what keeps us there. So now I'm going to start talking, or I'm going to start reading this stuff. First of all, there is a feature of our consciousness that gives order and shape to the world. It creates our. Thanks a lot, book. It creates our vision of reality. It creates dreams and arranges the known into a world. This feature is called the assemblage point. The assemblage point is the part of our energy body that is responsible for the creation of the world. Now, just a few things. This does not mean the creation of the world in the sense of like a god making material things, the way we think, it's the creation of the universe. You know, thank you, Yahweh. Um, that's not what he means. He means the creation of the world as we experience it. So the piecing together of reality, which is essentially not reality. This is the tonal, the world of things. In my Taoist conception, and I do not think that these are completely unrelated, especially after doing some amazing research. It wasn't mine, but I just like watched this thing. I'll do a different video on it about how basically even the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, was or Siddhartha Gautama was actually Iranian, and these biographies and these stories that are interpolated around his existence are, of course, fabricated biographies, just like the ones around Jesus. I mean, the ones around Jesus were supposedly only written a few years after his supposed death. The ones about Buddha were written a couple hundred years after his supposed death. So these are just narratives that people put in place around all these things. There's this whole cool awesomeness about it that he might have actually been Lao Ten or Lao Tzu, and was responsible for the indoctrination of the original thoughts on Taoism. If you look at this guy who was a sage, and these were Scythians, so they would have been Aryans or Iranians, and actually had that because his response or his whole philosophy was a response to dogmatic Zoroastrianism, which was dualistic and this is bad and this is good and all that kind of stuff. And he was saying, no, there is impermanence. Everything is in flux all the time. And to harmonize with that, it starts to sound very much like Taoism, you know, or like what I consider to be the core philosophy of esoteric Taoism. Anyway, I'll put that in my favorites, and it's an absolutely fascinating discussion. That to me, although the reason I mentioned it is just because all of this stuff, when I say, yes, this teaching about from the Toltecs reminds me of Taoism, I'm saying essentially these things are connected. You know, I made a video about that earlier. It's too difficult for scholars to say these have definite connections. Now I think we're starting to find out that they actually do. So, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything because that there's like a big gap between my notes. I'm going to read this one, although it doesn't seem to necessarily apply. At the moment, you are staring eye to eye into the face of God, and your body is configured in the same way that the Absolute, capital A, is configured, in a one-to-one relation to it. And the elements that compose your physical body, your emotional body, your energy body, are made up of the substances that were forged in the stars, active and going from the beginning of this universe. You have that already. How to access that and how to make that into something that's useful to you, that part of the teachings should never be a secret. There's one other way that I absolutely agree with this kind of stuff is like certain esoteric schools are so adamant that everything be kept a secret and only certain people, and it all has to do with lies. It all has to do with a conception of reality that is not real. You know, things are way more in flux and ever changing than you would think. The core substance of the universe is voidness. There's more yin void stuff around. Just look at physics. There's more antimatter than matter, you know. Then there is yang stuff around, even though we seem to be obsessed with the yang and the supposed actual material existence of reality. Okay, so a little bit more of this, and then we get back to the assemblage point. You have all of that already. How to access that should never be kept a secret. Remember how the real world is kept away from you. Primarily, it is by this illusion that you have programmed into your system, the illusion that we will call right now the ordinary. We create this program that we are now calling the ordinary, and we do this in order to be able to go on autopilot. It allows us to operate in this realm asleep, lazy, laid back, and relaxed. If you eliminate that program, you find yourself in a jungle of light and information overload, baby. My emphasis, where you don't know who you are or what's going on around you. That might be an experience that a lot of people in the New Age or in the nouveau magical thinking. I don't know why I just did it that way. That basically, you can get there with the psychedelic. He talks about psychedelics in here and different shocks to the system that are necessary. That people will have that experience, the overwhelming light that comes into you, and you don't exactly know what to do with it. And you start to get the sense that if you actually just were able to unlock or unhinge your desperately clinging consciousness or mind that's clinging to this conception of reality, if you were just able to just step back slightly or let go of that, then you would just be completely flooded with this holy light, and you would have no idea who you were. You would have no idea where you were or what was going on, because you start to realize that you have no self. That all of the ways that we piece ourself together is the illusion. That's the illusion. You are the illusion, not the world around you. The way you see it is the illusion as well, because that's you, and you are not you. Okay. Good times. Okay, last paragraph that's long that I did not highlight, and then we'll get into more specifics that I did highlight. I have no idea who I am. Even when I talk about my personal history, this is obviously Koyote talking, that's just something I plugged into myself. It's not me. It happens to have a connection to the Toltecs, and for some reason they seem to be exotic or sexy for some, or maybe it's meaningless to you. It doesn't matter to me. I just happen to be plugged into this lifetime. This body that was born will one day die, and between birth and death it seems to be doing things and have a life. When you put all my lifetimes together, you have a four-dimensional worm with a point of origin, an extension through time, and an end. It is just something I have plugged myself into right now. The program that allows you to function without having to feel lost in this jungle of light and information is the Tonal. It allows you to relax, to say, hello, I am so-and-so. This world is created because of a feature of your body that we call the assemblage point. So this is where all of this stuff comes together. When one is able to master the manipulation of the assemblage point, then one is essentially able to choose the reality around one. This is what I've always been talking about when deeply working with the assemblage point through the work with the Akadua, is that you can get yourself into immediate, intense trance states. You can alter your consciousness at will. You have a finely tuned biomechanism with this divine light running through it all of the time, and then when it starts to split off and get more in a three-dimensional level, you have the yin energy and the yang energy, and then you have the three that branch off, and you have jing, qi, and shen. You have all these different things that you can mix together and you can do. And any of those things, any of the chakras all up and down your system, any point of the body, you can start manipulating the assemblage point to sort of resonate there, to sort of just be at that point and experience a totally different reality from that space. And the more you're able to just relax with your will and your intention, and you can just hold it there, especially when you're doing with something like the Akadwa, eventually uh, two things really happen to, at least in my experience, is one, that when you don't have something like the Akadwa and you haven't been really doing a lot of the work, if you try to move your assemblage point, it'll more often get stuck. And so it's not always a good idea to try to manipulate it without having reached a certain level of alchemical awesomeness. Um, the other thing that happens is that it's sort of like the same thing, but the opposite. Once you do reach that, you can move it here, move it there, and it'll just go back when you go back into your normal mode of thinking or get up and walk away. At the same time, when you really focus and focus and focus on one place and bring it there, it will stay there for longer, so that you have less, focusing, will, intention, and all that kind of stuff, which is like a tension, a type of mental tension or tension in your consciousness, as opposed to just, dissolving into yin and letting things do themselves. You can program an intention into the yin thing and then just let it go. It's a little harder, especially since we always want to be on top of things. We always want to be in control when we're doing that. All right. So the assemblage point is the thing that creates this world, right? Created by a feature of your body that we call the assemblage point. The assemblage point is like a lens. It's just energy, and everything around you emits energy. The light hits the wall, clothing, and hair. It bounces off and hits your eyes. And this creates a chain reaction in your nervous system that you transform into color, shape, and distance. The decoding is happening inside you, but it is formless energy out there, undifferentiated, flowing at many different levels. And you have frequencies flowing from the stars. Sound does not carry an empty space. If it did, we would be deafened by all the stars in the universe. But stars do emit light, gamma rays, manta rays, and they bombard us too. The rays are flowing through us all the time. That's called reality. With the assemblage point, you have a filter, and there is a specific point where it is in you. That lens allows only a few of the vibrations in the universe to pass into your system. Let that digest for a little bit. I think you might actually be solving that thing that I was saying, in that there is a certain point where it is in you, and that lens allows only a few of the vibrations in the universe to pass into your system. So if we're thinking about it, it might be like a filament or a tube or something, like almost the way we look at the chakras now, and we think of them as like cones going this way and cones going that way. The assemblage point is also a lens, but it is a feature of your energy body that really filters consciousness. For most of us, the assemblage point is conceived as, oh wait, oh sorry, for most people in this For most people in this society, the assemblage point is more or less in the same place. It is the assemblage point that determines how the world appears to you, and what information we process as real. Psychics fine-tune some of what's coming in. If you change the assemblage point a couple of inches, you will find yourself in an alien world. If it is just barely rotated, you attain an altered state of consciousness. For most of us, the assemblage point is conceived as being behind and slightly to the left or slightly to the right. It is where it is for us because of the world we live in, and vice versa. The world is what it is because of this assemblage point. The light that comes from the supreme consciousness, Ometeot, attains its final shape depending on this lens of the assemblage point when it passes through. The assemblage point, this is where it gets funny, and I don't want to put weird ideas in your head, but this might help some people. The assemblage point corresponds to Yesod in the Kabbalah. It means foundation. The assemblage point is what supports the world. I just had some weird flash of light coming to me. I hadn't seen that in a while. The solidity of the world is there only because of how fixed your assemblage point is. Saying that again. The solidity of the world is there only because of how fixed your assemblage point is. Learn to shift your assemblage point and you acquire tremendous degrees of freedom, but also the need to exercise tremendous caution and finesse. This is the other point I wanted to really emphasize, so wake up. I've had tons of people say this in some ways relates to something that I was just talking about. Now I'm distracted. A lot of people have come to me over the past several years and asked exactly why the more I seem to wake up, even the more clear and resonant and light I become, the more I seem to become aware of the stuff that is actually detrimental to my own field, consciousness, and energy in general. I have experiences, and I have recently had experiences, where I will have tremendous practices, and I feel totally amazing. And then I go out and I spend some time with one person, and I have them in my field for days. This was even happening when I first moved up here, and I had less understanding of what was actually going on, because I've been experiencing this to some degree ever since I started awakening. And what you begin to realize is that every layer that you clear out, now your consciousness has the ability to become supremely aware of those layers, and each of those layers is like a sphere of experience. And in someone just comes into your experience, you might have to just interact with them on a totally mundane level. And when you're interacting on that totally mundane level, hi, how are you today? Oh, I'm doing well. You have absolutely no idea that you're sharing all of this energy. Then when you go away and you start to do your own thing again and you start to go internal, you're like, why is this person's face still in my head? Why can I still hear their voice in my and then you start to like, the point is that the more you clear out and the more you awaken, the more sensitive you become to that stuff. So the problem that people have always tried to, figure out or ask me about is why. I'm clearing all this stuff out. I'm more resonant. I'm more light. I'm all of this stuff. How come I'm still getting bothered by all of this psychic detritus? You know, all of this scurf from other people's, and I'm still picking it up. The reason is all of this. Maybe you've heard, and I'm reading and I'm quoting now, again from the same book. Maybe you've heard that when it comes to psychic abilities, before you have them, you are safe from certain things. After you have them, you become vulnerable. If you are a shaman, imagine what happens if you are not aware. If you react violently and the assemblage point suddenly switches. Where are you? A tiny story. Oh, now I have to go into this whole story. Yeah. I should have read ahead a little bit. So that's basically, I mean, that's it. That's the notion right there. When you become aware of these psychic abilities and you start to express them, you become more vulnerable. When you don't have those things and you're completely cut off from that level of experience, you're not picking that stuff up from other people anyway. So in some ways, people in mundane reality have it way easier. But in the sense that he was describing before, as in saying they are on autopilot. They're the ones who are asleep. When you're asleep and you're completely cut off to all those other layers of existence, they won't bother you. So then the question, of course, becomes, as a psychic, as somebody who is sensitive to all of these levels and layers of information and like goes out and gets some groceries and then feels completely tired after only being there for 30 minutes or something like that, how do we counteract that? You will learn. And it does have to do with sometimes the assemblage point. If you can hold yourself into a certain level of experience and reality, then it will become easier and easier and easier. Eventually, it won't become easier in so much as that you will become more skillful at this. So don't worry. This video, though, isn't totally about that complete concept, so I just wanted to finish exactly what I had about the assemblage point, and then that should be it, I think. I could read the story. I don't want to like quote too much out of this book because I want you to read it for yourselves. Let me just make sure I don't have. I don't want to read like all of his stories, you know. Yeah. Here's another one. Think of the essence of you, essentially. And he talks about essence and soul as a vibration of a specific frequency, for everything in this universe is vibration. When you created your personality, you created that personality on top of the vibration called essence. If the vibration of the essence is a very subtle electrical field, the robot, personality, and body forms a much stronger electrical field around it. The electrical field that surrounds the essence is fine-tuned by the assemblage point. So let me say it again. The electrical field that surrounds the essence, which is essentially the personality and body, forms a much stronger electrical field around it. The electrical field that surrounds the essence is fine-tuned by the assemblage point. Okay, so that's one more little thing. I promised that I would try to really like elucidate exactly what the assemblage point is to a friend. You know, I found myself describing the same things that I always describe and not really getting anywhere else, you know, so I thought it was important to share all this stuff about exactly what it is. It is about some serious shamanic shit. It is about creating your own reality. It is about shifting into actual other realities at the real essence of it. I'm not there, but I can certainly use it to induce altered states of consciousness. And again, this has to do with a certain level of refinement when one is working in this fashion and one is able to do that. And yeah. Alright, that's good.